Today, we're going to start covering a few concepts that are on the map tests that we don't cover during class. The reason we're doing these is to make sure you're best prepared for your map test in the spring, because we only see some of the information that's on the test. I want to give you the best opportunity to succeed, so that's why we're going to do these stations to make sure we look at material that you've seen before but you haven't seen in a couple of years. At this station, you're working on elements and molecular naming. At the top of your sheet, it says to be in the goal range in 7th grade, you should be able to represent compounds with molecular formulas. First, we're going to take a few guided notes on the topic, then we'll practice the skill. So I want you to start right at the top of your sheet where it says guided notes element. I'm going to go word for word, and what I've bolded is what I want you to fill into your note sheet. So starting off in that first blank, a chemical element is the building block of matter. That means it's the most simple part of matter in the world. It's the smallest you can get, a chemical element. It can be found on the periodic table. That should be the next blank you fill in. The periodic table is right down here in the lower right corner. This table shows all the different elements, and it has special properties of it. You'll learn a lot more about in 8th grade, why things are ordered the way they are. For now, all you need to know is that elements are found on this table. Finally, elements are represented by one capital letter or one capital letter and one lowercase letter. Here in the bottom left corner, I have the chemical symbol for hydrogen. It's just an uppercase H. The chemical symbol for helium, another element, is a capital H and a lowercase e. Those are elements. We're going to talk about the difference between elements and compounds in just a minute. Now we're moving on to the examples part. This is right beneath your guided notes. If you didn't get all those guided notes done, go ahead and rewind the video. You can take them down. You can pause wherever you need to. Make sure you are doing all of that. Here I've given you some examples of elements, and I want you to copy them down. You have 4 blanks. One is shorter than the others. That's because I'm showing you a chemical symbol rather than the full word. So first in your blank you should write O. O is a chemical symbol for the element oxygen. Next, I've given you 3 fully written out examples: hydrogen, carbon, and iron. These are 3 different types of elements. Again, elements are the simplest building block of matter. They're different than compounds. We're going to move into compounds next. By now, you should have taken your notes all the way up to where it says the word compound. If you need to pause, go ahead and do that. I'm going to move the video on to the compound notes. Alright, you should be looking at the compound section of your guided notes. Again, I've bolded what you need to fill into your blanks. A chemical compound is a substance composed of multiple elements. So earlier in the video, we were learning about chemical elements, the simple building blocks of matter. We're going to start moving now into compounds, which is multiple elements combined together. I have a picture down here of a compound. This is something you might see if you take a college chemistry class. It's called an orbital diagram, and it shows how these chemicals overlap. Right now, that is way outside of our focus. Remember, to be in the goal strand for 7th grade map, you just need to be able to represent compounds with formulas. That's what we're going to build up to by the end of this video. A chemical compound is a substance composed of multiple elements. Now, this is important, and this is your second blank. Compounds cannot be found on the periodic table. If you see something on the periodic table, it's not a compound. It's an element. Compounds are combinations of elements. You can think of it this way. When you make a sandwich, there are a bunch of ingredients that you put together. You have bread, you have meat, you have cheese, vegetables. Together, those are just ingredients. Together, those become a compound or a sandwich. Separately, they're just ingredients. They're just like elements. Together, they form the sandwich. Together, elements form the compound. Finally, compounds are combinations of elements. That's your final blank. That's exactly what we just went over. Elements are the building blocks of matter. Compounds are when you combine different elements. I'm going to move on to the examples. If you need to rewatch any part, please rewind the video or pause. We're going to go over some examples now. So now I've written 4 examples of compounds. I've made all these in their abbreviated formula because this is what you have to be able to do to be in the goal strand in 7th grade. You need to be able to read a molecular compound and represent it as a formula, or you need to be able to read a formula and tell me what molecular compound it is. First example right here with my mouse. I've just circled it. I think that'll show up on your video. CO2, that's also called carbon dioxide. That name comes from C, which is carbon, and di, meaning two. You see this two right here. Oxide, meaning oxygen. Carbon dioxide. You have to be able to recognize that this is a compound made of multiple elements. There are two elements in this compound. There's carbon and there's oxygen. That first example, carbon dioxide. The second example you've seen before, this is water. There are two elements in water. There's hydrogen and there's oxygen. There are two hydrogens, but overall, there's only two elements, hydrogen and oxygen. Let's move over to the next one. This is called methane, CH4. It's a gas. There are two elements again in this compound. There's carbon and there's hydrogen. There's four hydrogens, but together there's only two different elements, carbon and hydrogen. To go back to the sandwich analogy, it would be like if you made a sandwich out of bread and meat. You put 4 pieces of meat on the sandwich. There's still only 2 ingredients, bread and meat. There's a lot of meat, only 2 ingredients. In our compounds, when you're counting the amount of elements, you only care how many different elements there are. Here there are 2, carbon and hydrogen. Finally, this is a unique one, and I included it for a reason. H2. This is hydrogen gas. This is a compound, even though it only has one type of element. It only has hydrogen. But remember, if you reference your notes we just took, a chemical compound, and I'm going to jump back a slide, is a substance composed of multiple elements. H2 is composed of multiple elements, 2 hydrogens. This is a compound. H alone is a element. H2 is a compound. I'm going to move down to the final slide. If you need to finish taking these notes, if any part confused you, go ahead and hop back in the video. Here, these questions should match up with your check for understanding questions. I'm going to talk about how I would do the first one. Once I talk about that, I want you all to pause the video and try the next 2. The video is going to keep going and I'm going to cover the other 2 answers, but I want you to listen to the first one, pause, try the next 2, and then check again on the video. We're ready to get started. Oxygen, that's what this O is. Oxygen is a what? A compound or an element? If I'm thinking through using my note sheet, I read back that an element is the basic building block of matter, and it's represented by a capital letter or a capital letter and a lowercase letter. Here, we have one capital letter. Using my naming rules, I know that this is an element. I'm going to go ahead and highlight it. This is an element. How do I know that? Inside of the because section, I'm just going to type this. I'm going to say because it is one capital letter. You can use these naming rules, and it's really easy to name these compounds and elements. Let's try again. So I'm going to pause you now. You should pause the video once I say stop and try these on your own. Go ahead and pause. When you turn the video back on, I'll cover the other 2 examples. I want you to try those 2 on your own. Go ahead and pause the video and get started. Now that you're back from pausing the video, I want to talk about the other 2 answers. I went ahead and bolded element because I realized I did not do that before the pause. And now we're going to talk about the other 2 answers. See how you did. If you made a mistake, correct it on your sheet. This isn't a test. This is just getting you ready for the test. NO2 is a compound or an element. Always, when I'm trying to figure out these questions, I look back to my naming rules. I know elements are either a capital letter or a capital and a lowercase. If it's anything other than that, anything, it's a compound. I look here, I see that I have 2 capital letters. That means it is a combination of 2 elements. I read my definition. A chemical compound is a substance composed of multiple elements. NO2 is a compound because It is composed of two elements. Those two elements, nitrogen and oxygen. All right. Our third and final one, let's come down here. He, this stands for helium. It's a gas. Helium is a compound or an element. I'm going to look at my naming rules. You never have to guess on these. Always follow your naming rules. Helium is a compound or an element. My naming rules say elements are represented by one capital letter or one capital letter and a lowercase letter. H is a capital letter. E is a lowercase letter. Helium, then, is an element because it is composed of one capital and one lowercase letter. Oops, made a mistake. That's all there is to this. You have to look at your sheet, decide, am I dealing with a single uppercase letter? If you are, it's an element. Am I looking at an uppercase and a lowercase letter? If you are, that's an element. If you see anything else, any other combination of these terms, it's a compound. To recap the video, we started off saying that an element is the building block of matter found on the periodic table. And then we did our naming rules right here. I gave you a few examples. Oxygen, hydrogen, carbon, and iron. Those are those basic building blocks. A compound is multiple elements. We used the sandwich analogy earlier in the video. Ingredients are like elements. The sandwich bread, the meat, the cheese. Those are elements. When you combine them together, you create a sandwich. When you combine elements together, you create a compound. We gave a few examples. Carbon dioxide, water, carbon tetroxide. This is also known as methane. Finally, we have hydrogen. Then we did a few check for understanding questions. These questions help drive home for us the difference between compounds and elements. What I want you to do now, take a look at the bottom of your sheet. You have a chart that lists all the different components of air. So this is all in the air we breathe. Every single thing you see on that left side, A through Q, is in the air that we breathe. That next column says symbol or chemical formula. You're going to see exactly what you saw on the check for understanding questions. You are going to go into the next column and tell me whether it is an element. If it's an element, it has an uppercase letter or an upper and a lowercase letter. If it's a compound, it's anything else. Finally, if it's a compound, the worksheet wants you to name the different elements found in it. This might be a little bit tough, it might be a little bit new. You saw this in 6th grade, you'll see it again in 8th grade. I want to give you the opportunity to watch and try these activities. Now that the video is over, you should focus on completing the bottom of your worksheet. When you've completed the bottom of your worksheet, raise your hand. I'll bring you the next activity to get started on. Good luck.